Just doing a basic task on the computer requires an immense amount of trust. You trust so many people, organizations, and principles to take your email safely and privately to its destination. Just first, think about your physical space. You trust that there's no one looking over your shoulder, you trust that there aren't cameras reading everything you write, and you trust that someone's not going to barge in, take your computer, and access all of your files. While you're typing, you're trusting that the keyboard isn't a modified keyboard that's recording everything you type. You trust that if you have an external keyboard where it's plugged into your computer, you don't have a device that's recording everything and transmitting it to someone else. You trust that the operating system that takes those keystrokes sends them to your web browser or whatever you're using to access email and doesn't record them or send them to someone else. You trust that the browser itself takes those keystrokes and those messages and doesn't share them with the browser manufacturer. You trust that the browser can segregate the data for your email client from other tabs that you may have open so that they can't access it. You trust that the operating system, like Windows, makes it so that other apps that are installed aren't able to access what is in the web browser. You trust that when the browser makes a request to gmail.com, it's pointed in the right direction, that the DNS, the domain name server that it's requesting from, isn't going to lie and say that gmail.com is actually served by someone else, that it really points to the IP address. It's kind of like the phone number for the internet, that it points to the correct IP address for Gmail. You trust that when you hit send on that email, that no one else that's near you is able to access those Wi-Fi signals. You trust that the Wi-Fi that you're using, if it's at a store or an ice cream parlor, that the owner isn't reading all of the messages that are going through. Similarly, when they send that data to the ISP, to the internet provider, that the internet provider isn't reading your data. And when the internet provider sends it to the Google servers, or maybe through some intermediary to get to the Google servers, that no one else is reading your email. And you trust that the email servers are protected, that they have physical security so that the people that work at the data centers can't access your emails. They can't get into the hard drives and access them, and that they have good security so that other people can't get in and access it. And then you do the whole thing in reverse to get the email out for the recipient. So there's a lot of trust that happens in this whole process. And there's been incidents where each element of that has been breached, where someone has changed the domain name server to point to a malicious address, where someone is listening in on someone else's Wi-Fi, where someone has a keylogger implanted within the keyboard that's recording all of the keystrokes. So all of these transactions that happen, they all have security implications. And for a while, this kind of was how the world worked. You just had to trust. You just kind of crossed your fingers and hoped that no one was snooping, or if they were, that they weren't going to do anything malicious. But fortunately, we don't live in that world anymore. Fortunately, we have encryption so that we can send a message from A to B through multiple intermediaries, and those intermediaries won't be able to snoop or modify that message. And this challenge has existed since the dawn of time, since people were sending messages. If you think back to Caesar's time, he would have to send messages maybe to his generals, and he would have to figure out a cipher or some way to encrypt or change the message so that it could get to the destination without anyone that could overhear it knowing what it was about. In World War II, the Nazis had the Enigma machine, and for the Allies in the US, we had the Navajo code talkers. And they would be able to say the message so that anyone could hear it, but only the intended recipient would know what was actually being said. And so we've been able to encrypt various stages of this process. We've been able to encrypt messages to servers. We've been able to encrypt messages that are on hard drives at the servers. We've been able to encrypt messages between two email providers. And the holy grail of this is end-to-end encryption, where you encrypt it on your device, and then the only person who's able to decrypt it is the intended recipient. So all those intermediaries, they know where it's supposed to go, they can handle it, they can store it, they can do all those things that you want of it, except they don't actually know what it is. It's just a gobbledygook of numbers.